Okay, today's beautiful daf is Bava Metzia daf Menches Bava Metzia 58. Today's daf Yomi we're going to dedicate for Yeshua for Am Yisrael, Shmir for the Chayalim, Atzoa for the Shvuyim. We're going to start on the bottom line of Zayin Beis, or where the Mishnah had said that if a person was a Shomer Chinam, he was an unpaid watchman, he does not swear about hektish. He does not swear about the sacred items. Mar challenges this. There are minu, but we weren't in a Mishnah in the Seches Shkolim. How can you say a Shomer Chinam does not swear about the sacred items? We learned from the Mishnah. B'nei ha'ir sheshtokel ha'sheklein. So they have to send, everybody sending their half shekel to the Beis Hamikdash to be used for the sacrifices. But after they sent it, nignavu Osha, so they sent it with showmen, they sent it with agents to bring it. And after they sent it, it was stolen or lost. If when they came to bring these agents to the court, the truma had already been separated. And what this means, Rashi says, they had taken the money that had been collected in the temple treasurers had taken it and selected it and divided it into three separate boxes, three separate shofaros to divide up for the communal offerings. But if by the time they came to the court, it had already been separated, then under those circumstances, on top of Nefes Samad Aleph, Nishban Gezarin, then the agents have to take an oath to the treasurers that they did not, in fact, make a mistake, because so they have to make an oath to the treasurers that they were not negligent. Because, and the reason is because once they have already separated money in the charity, in the collection boxes, then the responsibility for this lost object no longer goes to the owner, but rather it goes to the hektish. Like we say that they would be able to take a separation, Rashi says, for the money that was lost, and it would have counted, because when they separated it, they didn't know that it was lost. The imlav, or on the top of 58a, the imlav, but if they didn't, but rather they knew about it not after it was separated, but they knew that the money was lost before it was separated, then nishbanu bnei ha'ir. Then the agents don't swear to the court, but they swore to the people in the city. And they swear to the people of the city that they were not negligent. And the people of the city have to then take a new separation. They have to send a new half shekel, meaning they didn't fulfill their obligation with the first one. Nimtu, let's say they found the money, or let's say the robbers returned it, then then both the initial half shekel that they sent counts, and they also have, and the second one they sent, they both count. And it has to be used that year, and they can't use it for the next year. But anyway, we see from here, our Mishnah had said that the Shomer Chinam does not swear about hektish, about temple property, but in this case, these watchmen have to take an oath. So this is a direct contradiction to our Mishnah. So Amar Shmuel, no, who says this is a Shomer Chinam? Who said that this was an unpaid watchman? These are paid watchmen, and they're taking the oath to get paid. That's why they're taking the oath. They're not taking the oath to say they don't have to pay. They want to get paid for their work, and that's why they're taking the oath. Gemara says, "Well, so then why are they taking the oath to the temple? The temple doesn't pay them. They should take the oath to the people in their own town. They should be taking the oath to the people in their own town. But the first line of the Mishnah said they take the oath to the treasurer. So the Gemara says, no. Amarabba, they're taking the oath to the people of their city, and they're doing that in order to get paid. But they're doing it in front of the court's treasurer, because the court's treasurer is also a party to the case because they have the loss. So they do it in front of them to basically claim that they didn't steal it. So, so we don't want them to call them, because we don't want them to suspect them of having it stolen. Inami, or alternatively, the reason why they do it that way is potion. So, or also, we don't want that them to be accused of being negligent, and we need them to know that they're not responsible to pay. Meaning to say, we don't want them to suspect the agents that they were unpaid watchmen, and under these circumstances, they would have been negligent. Gemara says, but it says that the claim that they're making is that it was stolen or was lost. The shomer sachar b'gneva v'aveda chiyuv v'mechayev. But if that was the claim, that it was stolen or was lost, that was what we said at the beginning of the Mishnah. It says it was stolen or lost. Well, then such a claim would not be helping them if they were a paid watchman. Because the shomer sachar b'gneva v'aveda chiyuv v'mechayev. A paid watchman is indeed responsible for theft or loss. Mar says. Gemara explains. So the Gemara explains, and if you want to say that it was indeed the money of the temple, and if you want to say that we're talking about they were watching the money of the temple, okay, even though they should have to still swear, even though they're not responsible to pay, but still they should have the loss of their payment because they had to do this watch. And so therefore, since they didn't do the responsibility, they shouldn't collect the money. So Rabba explains, Nignavu Balistin Mizuyan. When it says it was stolen, it means it was stolen through a total accident, which was an armed bandit. We had this 3 times already in the tractate. And Avdu Shetavus Finas Vayam, loss does not refer to the loss Shomer Sachar is responsible for. It refers to an onus, refers to an accident that it sank at the sea. Rabbi Yochanan gives a different answer. Who's our Mishnah like? Amani Rabbi Shimon, that our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon, who says, Kodshim shechayev b'achriyuson yesh lo hen ona v'nishbain olam. That he says, yes, our Mishnah says Shomer Chinam does not swear about Kodshim. An unpaid watchman does not swear about sacred activities, but this is a different type of Kodshim. This is the sacred possession, shechayev b'achriyuson, where a person has direct responsibility, meaning to say that he's completely responsible. So it's like it's his, it's like he owns it because he has to replace it if it's lost. And so therefore the laws of Bona apply in that case. And indeed, the Shomer Chinam would have to take an oath for it. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Hatenach Achel Nisrama Truma. Okay, you could say it's Shomer Chinam, it's Achraya, so it's like it's yours. That's only the case before the truma was separated. That maybe you could say it's like the Baalim, the owners, the non-temple still owns it. But once the truma was separated, once the donation to the temple was separated, the Baalim clearly don't have responsibility for it, because once it's separated, it belongs to the temple. You don't have to replace it. The Tanya Tormin Avod that they would separate it for the money that was lost and it was collected, and the future to be collected. Meaning to say, once they separated from it, even though it was lost, you fulfilled your obligation to give. So it says the Rebbe Lazar, according to this idea, yes, it's true. Why does he take an oath? That you're really not required to take this oath. It's just a takana that the rabbis made. So we don't want the people to not take the temple property seriously. So the rabbis made you take an oath. But even though normally a shomer watchman is biblically required to take an oath, in this case, they're not biblically required. And then we said in our Mishnah that if a person was hired to work, to be a watchman, he does not have to pay for the theft or the loss of avadim, or of real estate, or of contracts, or of temple property. So Ramile Rav Yosef Bar Chama Rabba Tanan, we learned in, he says we have a contradiction from a brisa. We learned in our Mishnah, Tanan knows the Sachar Eina Mashalim, Minhi. So our Mishnah says that the one who's paid does not pay under these circumstances. If you're paying paid to watch the temple property, you don't pay if it was stolen. But we have a brisa, and the brisa says, "Hasocher asapol." Let's say the temple treasurer hires a worker, l'shmor asapara, to watch the red heifer, l'shmor asatinok, to watch a child. Why is the temple hiring a watchman to watch a child? Is this babysitting, that they're having babysitting hour in the base of Mikdash? That's not what's going on. But they had to raise these children b'tahara, in a state of ritual purity, so that they could bring the red heifer in a state of ritual purity. So if you hire a watchman to watch the red heifer, or to watch the children, or shmor es hatzrayim, or to watch the seeds for the bringing of the korban omar. So this was just what happened 2 days ago. They used to plant a field of barley for the purpose of bringing the korban omar, and they would plant this 70 days before Pesach. And those days, the field needed to be watched. And so therefore, that's one explanation that Rashi gives. Rashi gives a second explanation, and the Brisa is referring to the sabbatical year. They weren't able to plant seeds for the barley offering, and so therefore, what they would do is they would find seeds that were growing on their own, and they would hire workers to watch them until it came time to harvest it. Tosa says, well, this is a problem because you're not allowed to watch the field in the sabbatical year to not let anybody else take it. That becomes prohibited, and so therefore I could use it for the korban. And so Tosfos answers that this watchman wouldn't stop other people from specifically taking it, but he would just tell them, listen, do you want to take it? We were planning on using this for the temple. Do you really want to take it? That's not appropriate. And so that's what they would say. Okay, anyway, we go back to it, that the Brisa says that if you hire a worker to watch the cow, or to watch the child, or to watch the seeds, Shabbos, you're basically just hiring him for the day, so you don't pay him for Shabbos. Shabbos alav. So if something happened on Shabbos, he's not responsible because he wasn't hired to watch that day. But let's say if you hire him, hire schir Shabbos, let's say you hire him for a full week, or schir chodesh, or you hire him for a full month, or schir shana, or a year, or schir shavua, you hire him for all 7 years. No schir Shabbos. Then you're able to give him the payment for Shabbos, because you're not specifically hiring him for Shabbos, and the payment for Shabbos is called muvla, it's havla, it's absorbed into the rest of the week. So therefore he's responsible for the watching on Shabbos. So we see from here, so the Gemara says, my lav l'shaim. So what does it mean that he's responsible for watching it on Shabbos? Doesn't it mean that if it's lost or stolen, he's responsible to pay? So we see from here, a hired worker has to, even for hektish, has to pay. Gemara says, no, it's not for him to pay. It's just that if it was stolen on Shabbos, he loses his payment. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if it's just referring to the fact he's not getting paid, the first case that says, the first case of the price, which says he's not responsible Shabbos, would it make sense to say, well, in that case, it's to make him lose his payment, Shabbos. But that case, he wasn't getting paid for Shabbos because he was just a day worker. We said in that case, you don't pay him the day worker. So ishtik. So when Rabba heard this question, Rabba was quiet. So Rabba said to Rav Yosef Bar Chama, Amar Lei said to him, Midei Shmiel Chabaha. Can you explain this? Basically, again, the question is, it says that in the Brisa that he's responsible for the activity on Shabbos. So, and he's a hired worker, but our Mishnah said that the hired worker is not responsible for something stolen or lost from the temple. And so, how do we explain that? Now, if you want to say it means he just loses his wages, it can't be, because in the first case, he wasn't being paid for his work on Shabbos, and yet it still says that he's not responsible for Shabbos. So, how do we explain the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Brisa? So, the Gemara explains. So, he says, did you hear anything about this? So Amarle, Hachi Amarav Sheshes, Peshekanu Miyado. Chin Amarav Yochanan Peshekanu Miyado. Basically, he wasn't responsible. The Bryce is talking about he wasn't responsible. Technically speaking, our Mishnah says you're exempt, but this guy made a separate deal, and he says, I'm going to absorb the responsibility. And so therefore, since he made himself responsible, he took a kinyan, and he says, even though biblically speaking, he's exempt, technically speaking, he's exempt, I'm making myself responsible. So, well, then, if you made yourself responsible, then you have responsibility. Rabbi Shimon says, "Kachim shechay b'achriyuson yesh le'nana." So, even though kachim does not sacred temple property does not, the laws of Anah don't apply, and we saw a dispute about what that means yesterday. But if it's kachim which you are specifically responsible to replace, well, then it's like your property, and so then the laws of Anah apply. She'eino chay b'achriyuson ein le'nana. So Tani Tana Kamad Rav Yitzchak Baraba, Kachim Shchayv B'Achriyusin Chayev. He says if it's Kachim that you're responsible to pay for, then we're going to say you're responsible for Ona. You're Shani Korebahan, and the reason is because I read about these words. If a person makes a sin and trespasses Hashem v'chichesh, he's against God and v'chichesh. She'ino Chayev B'Achriyusin. So we see in that case, the money of the temple, we're being told has to bring a korban and shvuas apikadon, and you have to take an oath about the deposit. But she'eno chayav b'achriyuson pater shani korban ba'misov v'chichesh, because there, if you're not chayav b'achriyuson, it says only if the wrong happened to your friend ba'misov v'chichesh, not to the temple, meaning to say, so. Amarle Klapi Weiss, Rav Yitzchak Baraba says to this Tana, I don't understand. It should be the opposite. This Brisa doesn't make sense at all. Ipcha mistaber. The Brisa should mean the opposite, meaning to say that if it's not something you're responsible, that belongs to God more than if you are responsible. And if you want to say that he's obligated for something of the temple and exempt him from something that is not belonging to the temple, it should say kachim. I'm reading the Rashi. It say kachim that he is responsible for. He's going to be exempt because there is bamisova kichesh. So therefore, but if he's not responsible for them, then he's b'chay, because then I said shba Hashem v'chichesh. And furthermore, somebody who is not, if it's not active, he should be more responsible because shomer akdoshos are pturin. So he says to him, Amarle Ismay. So the Tana says, Rabba, should I erase this Tana? Amarle, lo. This is what it means. Kachim Shachayev B'Achriyuson, if the owner is responsible for them, Chayev, he's going to be responsible to take an oath because they belong to some, they are Amiso, even though they somehow belong to the temple. This Rabu mi Bava Chichesh. As we're going out from the Pasuk. She'eno Chayev B'Achriyuson, but if they don't belong to the temple, Potter, doesn't have to take an oath if he's not responsible for it directly. The imit mi ba'misa v'chakesh, because we learn out from there. Okay, so now basically the Gemara we finish up this piece, and the Gemara says, Rabbi Huda says, somebody sells a sefer Torah or a pearl or an animal, the laws of Onah don't apply. Tanya, Rabbi Huda Omer, Afan Mokor sefer Torah, ein lo Onah. Somebody sells a Torah scroll, there's no Onah to it. Nafisha ein ketzel dameh, because there's no limit to its value. Torah has no limit to its value. Behemo margo is an animal and a pearl. There's no onah. Mesha adam rotzel zavgan. So the person's going to basically want to pair the animal and the pearl with another animal or pearl, and so therefore they'll pay any amount. Amrlo valo kol adam. Everything a person wants to do that. A person wants to always combine things with something else. And nevertheless, we say there's a nah. Rabbi Yehuda says, Hani chashivu v'hani lo chashivu. No, the pearl and the animal are more important to him. So therefore, he's going to spend any amount of money. The ad kama, what's the law that there is no enough for? Eventually, there'll be enough. So Amar Meimer ad kidei demeim will pay double because that's what a person will want to add. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Afa Mocher Sus v'Sayef v'Chatitom v'Mochama Ein Lemona. Also, a person who sells a horse or a sword or a shield during a war, there's no onar. A person will pay any amount of money for them because it's basically your life depends upon it. So now we start from here, basically for the next page and a half. We have such a beautiful agadita. And in fact, tomorrow's daf, which I regret I won't be able to do in person with you, is one of the most famous dafim in all of the entire Talmud. Very, very famous story called the Tanur Shel Achnai, the oven of Achnai. But maybe we'll have time to do it later this afternoon. I don't know my schedule yet. So, but if we don't have time to do it, you need to, please, I beg you to do it on your own. So it says, Keshem she'onah b'mekach u'memkar. So the Mishnah says, just like there's onah, there's fraud when it comes to purchasing. Kach onah, so too there's wrong. Here we have to say onah b'dvarim. There's a prohibition of wronging somebody with money, and there's a prohibition of wronging somebody with words. And how is that? Well, Yomar, a person shouldn't say, B'kama chayfetzeh. A person shouldn't ask, how much for this object? Well, Eino road stilikach, but he doesn't want to buy it, meaning you're tricking the person. You can't ask him that. You're making him feel bad. Imayabal tshuva, if the person is a penitent, well, Yomar, you shouldn't remind the person, remember what you were like before you did this. Imu ben gerim, if the person is a convert, well, Yomar, you don't say to the convert, oh, remember what your ancestors used to do. It says, the convert you shall not wrong and do not press upon him. You're not allowed to wrong your friend. That's bonos tvar ma'klasim medaber. That refers to words. Bonos mamon. Does it refer to words, or maybe it means to wrong him with money. When it states, when it says you sell something to your friend, or you purchase it from your friend, well, that's clearly wronging with money. Well, if that's the case, so how do I understand the verse? So that's bonus tvarim. That's wronging him with words. So okay, how do you wrong somebody with words? If he's a penitent, don't say, remember your initial actions. If he was a convert, remember your father's actions. Let's say he's a convert, he wants to study Torah. Don't say to him, oh, this mouth that you used to eat is not kosher food. You want to come study Torah. It says that, do you want to study the Torah that was said by the mouth of God? How can you do that? And let's say there's a person who is facing afflictions, or he's sick, or he's burying his children. Don't show up to his grave, to the Shiva, and say to him, don't say to him like Eob's friend said to him, what did Eob say? Eob's friend said, Zechorna mihunaki avad ve'efo yisharim nechkadu. Means that Eo's friend showed up and said, it's the fact that you didn't look at your ways, because there's nobody who's suffering who didn't do something wrong. Don't say that. You're not allowed to say that. If you say that, you did something wrong. Let's say your donkey drivers were looking for grain from him. Don't send him to somebody else. You say he's selling grain. You know he's really never not selling. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, also, don't go into a store and make it look like you want to buy something if you don't have the money for it. Because this is a matter that's given over to the heart. Wherever something is given over to the heart, it says you shall fear Hashem, because Hashem knows. It's worse to wrong somebody with words than with money. Because by wronging somebody with words, it says you shall fear God. By money, it doesn't say that. That when you wrong somebody with words, it affects their body. When you wrong somebody with money, it's just their money. He says, if you wrong somebody with money, you can pay it back. But if you hurt them with words, you can't pay them back. So we learned, whoever embarrasses their friend in public, it's like you spilled their blood. Malbin literally means to make their face white. So basically he says to him, you said right. It's like you killed him. Because you see the red comes out of his face and his face turns white. Rabbeinu Yonah in Shari Tshuva says that if you insult somebody, it's an abizrayu of misa. It's connected to death. And so therefore it's yavar yavar, that you're not allowed to insult somebody because it's like you're killing them, because you're making their face turn white. Abai says to Rav Dimi in Eretz Yisrael, what are they careful about? You don't let the face turn white. Everybody goes down to hell except for 3. So the Gemara says, you think everybody goes down to Gehenna? Whoever goes down to Gehenna, will come up from Gehenna, except for 3 people that go down and will not come up. And who are these 3 people? Somebody who is with a married woman, somebody who makes somebody's face embarrassed in public, and somebody who gives a bad nickname to a friend. The Gemara says, what's the difference between giving somebody a bad nickname and whitening their face and embarrassing them? The same thing. The Gemara says, even though he's already used to this nickname, and it's not really embarrassing to him anymore, nevertheless, if you give this person this bad nickname, if you call him by it, then you go straight down to Gehenna and you don't come up from it. But it doesn't, the commentaries say, Tosfos says, it doesn't mean that you don't come up ever, but it means that everybody else goes down and comes up right away. But these people, they're stuck down there for longer. Maybe only after 12 months. That's what Tosfos says. Amar Rav Bar Khan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Noach lo Adam sheyavo al safek eishes ish, on top of the Testament Aleph, he says it's better that a person have relations with a woman who's possibly married before you embarrass your friend in public. How do we know this? The Darash Rava says, what do we do from the verse? It says about David Amelech, it says Uvitzal'i Samcho, that David Amelech says that when I limped, they rejoiced. V'nesfu, and then they all gathered at me. And karu v'lo damu. And what happened was they were tearing, but they were not be silenced. And they tore me, but were not be silenced. So Amar Davo Fnei Kodesh Baruch Hu Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, David says, God, you know that if they would tear my flesh, my blood will not spill out to the earth. Even when I'm engaged in studying about the laws of tzaras and the laws of tumah in the tent. And I'm not discussing the laws of arayos. Still, Omrim David Abal Ish they're taunting me about my sins, and they say, "What's the punishment for being with a married woman?" But I respond, if somebody's with a married woman, they get executed with strangulation. But he does have a share in the world to come. Meaning to say, eventually he's going to go up from Gehenna. But somebody who's with his embarrasses somebody does not have a share in the world to come. Person would be better to throw himself into a furnace rather than embarrassing his friend in public. What's the source for this? From Tamar, because it says about Tamar that when the pasuk says that when Judah said to Tamar, "You're adulteress," and he commanded her to be burnt, it says Himutzeis v'shalcha chamia. She was being brought out to be burnt, but she had the proof against Judah, but she didn't expose it. She just sent him to privately. So she, even though she was correct, she was going to allow herself to be burnt rather than exposing the person who did this, who was actually in the wrong, but he would have been embarrassed. So this is today's daf, and the daf yomi for Shabbos is, like I said, that one of the most famous in the whole Shas, and hopefully we'll have time to do it later today.